Hello there, and a very warm welcome to what is finally going to be episode 1 of the Bouncy Orange Ball podcast. Should probably have got a basketball shirt with the number 1 on it. There we can see Paolo Banchero, number 5. Should have been a unanimous Rookie of the Year, but a silly Utah Jazz beat writer decided he would vote for Walker Kessler. A very warm welcome along to everyone who is very quickly joining the stream here. I have been pretty blown away, to be honest, by the amount of people that have engaged with everything that I've been trying to do on the front of British basketball. It's very much a sort of vocational kind of thing. Don't slag the hairdo. Seemed like a good idea at the time, just by the way. For anyone listening on the audio form of this, because this is going to be an actual podcast now that we're going to send down the podcast streams, then there's going to be some kind of visual references from time to time, which you're either going to have to live with, or of course you can go back and watch the video. Goes without saying, if you are enjoying this stream, or if you at some point are enjoying this stream, obviously me talking nonsense at the start is not particularly enjoyable. But if you think this stream will be of value, or is of value at any point to anyone within the fan basketball, then please do make sure and share it out, because the way that we kind of get the message of what this podcast is, which I talked about the last time on my previous stream, the way that we get that message out is by sharing it, by talking about it, and by making sure that we can have conversations of value about topics of value with people who know about it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do today. So if you're just joining the stream now, I should say to you as well, if you contact me on my @HodgieTheHack Twitter account, either via direct message or with a tweet replying to the stream or anything like that, then that would be great. I'm going to try and get as much of the audience interactivity in as possible. Hello, Matt. I knew you'd be a stalwart, mate. Thank you, and welcome along, and well done for your excellent work so far during this summer. And talking of excellent work so far and during this summer, then I am absolutely delighted to welcome Frank Danlares, I think we go, Dieres, if you want to give it the proper pronunciation, who has been doing some fantastic reporting on the business side of the London Lions deal, because that's what we're here for today. We're here to answer the question, what on earth is happening with the Lions? And then also, as well as Frank, I have Paul Brown, who has been doing some amazing investigative reporting around 777, around British basketball in general, and just generally trying to cast a light on some of the things that are happening. Gentlemen, a very warm welcome along to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, good to be here, Stuart.
Yeah, all good. Nice to be here. Thanks, Stuart.
Excellent. Right, I think we'll start with yourself, Frank, because already, and everyone, any questions you want to have asked today, please do get them in. Replying to the stream is a nice, easy way to do it, or any thoughts you've got, please do that, because this is here. It's a public service broadcast brought to you in full by Hodgie the Hack and these two guys. Frank, I want to start with yourself. From a business standpoint, what went on there, right? Because I think a lot of people know the background, and we'll maybe go into that with yourself, Paul, just about how the London Lions got to the point they did. I imagine the conversation is probably going to go that way. But I think a lot of people already know that side of it, the kind of 777 related side of it. What I'm interested in, though, Frank, is what has gone on since. And please feel free to speak in detail.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, how long have you got? I mean, there's a lot that's happened in the last few weeks alone, really. I guess if we start from like the end of the season, I think it wasn't a secret that there was a lot of uncertainty around the London Lions' future and where the money was going to come from. It's my understanding that Tassanet and Zalgiris were, quite quick to look to invest and take over the London Lions and were engaged in talks before the administration. So Zalgiris and Tassanet, they wanted to buy the London Lions. They were talking to 777 and whoever might be also involved in running what's left of 777 now as well. And I think they thought they had done a deal. I think they thought that they had agreed to buy it from 777, but for whatever reason, that deal didn't get finished. And so the next thing that happened was the London lines were the subject of a winding up order brought by, I think, more than one creditor, but the one creditor that we definitely know about was HMRC. And there was due to be a court hearing on the 25th of July. And at that court hearing, HMRC were calling for London lines to be liquidated, basically. That was the potential outcome that day, that London lines just completely ceased to exist and, there would be nothing to buy. Lawyers argued that there should be an adjournment. And in actual fact, the judge dismissed the petition, which basically allowed the London lines to be put into administration and for what happened next to happen next. Now, some people wanted to know, why were the London lines put into administration? Who actually triggered that? And it's my understanding, and it's always been referred to in the communication that was put out there, that it was a debenture holder. It's my understanding that debenture holder was Zalgiris itself. So Zalgiris triggered the administration, and then they sought to buy the London lines that way. But of course, once you go into administration, an administrator is appointed, and it's their obligation to sell to the best offer. So there was no guarantee at that point that Zalgiris and Tassanet would actually get London lines. So they had to show that they were the best owners, the best people providing the best overall package. I mean, it's often said, that administrators have to sell to the best offer. It's not just about money. My understanding is that they considered the Tassanet offer to be the best overall. So that's not just about return to creditors, it's also about a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, it was
sorry to chime in there, Frank. Who made that decision, and what was the decision-making process then, as you understand it?
That decision is taken by the administrators. So they were appointed on the 30th of July, and basically within 2 weeks they'd sold the club. But they were appointed on the 30th of July. They obviously have to look and see what there is to sell, where the money is owed, etc., etc. And then on, I believe it was the 7th of August, they went public saying, we've been appointed administrators and we are actively seeking offers for London lines. Now, this was, of course, a bit of a stir, because on the 31st of July, Tassanet and Zalgiris had announced that they'd basically struck a deal to buy London lines already, and it was kind of like a fait accompli. We still don't really know why they did that. I haven't been able to get an answer on that from them. So we're in the realm of guesswork a little bit, but I mean, they obviously felt that they had it sewn up, but of course it's not that straightforward. And the administrators had to go public. They had to invite other offers, which is what they did. And basically, from the 7th of August, quite a few other interested parties got in touch with them. And my understanding was that they were, I think it was 3 offers with proof of funds, 2 more offers that didn't get to the proof of funds stage, and 2 or 3 more interested parties who also held talks with the administrators. So basically then the administrators, they examine the offers. I mean, if it's, they can only obviously go with the ones that have proof of funds. So there's 3 offers to consider. I think the overall package that was being asked for was in the realm of £2 million, which was to pay off debts of more than £1 million. And obviously other goodwill payments and stuff like that. And then on top of that, you have to provide working capital.
Hang on, just sorry to chime in again. So those debts, can you break those down a bit for us? What the debts were, who they were to, who the creditors were, and your understanding of that side of it?
I don't have the detail on exactly who the money was owed to. I know from speaking to people close to the process that it was the number was 1.1 million was the money that was outstanding. I mean, we know that HMRC was owed some of it. That's why they were bringing the winding up order. I believe there was also a loan to the league, but Paul might know more about that. But beyond that, we don't know. I mean, we might get more detail because the administrators will publish some more details in the coming weeks about the offer, but we're not there yet, and until then we don't actually know where else the money was earned.
Do you have an inkling? No, like
I don't know. No,
Paul, do you want to chime in there if you get any more info on that side of it? Because I think it's important to note, just in terms of the value of the question, I think it's important to note the people that have been let down here, the people that have suffered as part of this process. And it's not all just corporations or the tax man. Like, there are individuals, lots of individuals I know who have contacted me that they've not been paid money. And so I think it's and as well as these individuals, there's going to be entities as well. So I'm interested to talk to you any more on that.
Yeah, well, if you look at the winding up petition, there are some names on it, including the kit supplier. And we've been told by various sources from BBL circles that the Lions had not been paying various contractors at the Copper Box and people who had worked for the club for months. So I suspect that quite a few of those names would have been on the winding up petition as well. 777's method of operation tends to be to pay as late as possible or not at all. It's what they've done in the BBL for years, and even as long ago as the beginning of last season, it was causing problems for the other clubs, because if the Lions, the flagship franchise, weren't paying contractors to work in their building for their team, the same contractors were threatening to down tools and not work with the other teams as well, which was causing a huge amount of uncertainty for the clubs, which needed to be able to.
By the way, just to chime in there, it's almost like having a conflict of interests with the same organisation running the league as its primary team and champion is not the best idea in the world for any sporting league, right?
No, it's a very strange way of operating. I kind of get the feeling that the money that had been promised by 777 was just too good for the league to ignore some of the things they wanted as part of this deal. But any sensible administrator would have spotted that that's not really the most professional way to run a league, and clearly presents a conflict of interest between, club. You can't be a club owner and a league owner at the same time. It's something that most leagues would just not allow.
Absolutely that, and I think it's. I mean, if you look into the work that Paul and Filippo Clare have done on 777 in particular, you will find a pattern of scary, ridiculous, crazy. I mean, the number of adjectives I could choose to describe what you'll find if you start diving into the work with Josimar is properly, genuinely, in the literal sense, well, as literally as this word could be understood, somewhat mind-blowing, like genuinely like, the metaphor of head exploding is one that you get in just about every article you would have read. And I think there was a keenness from a league standpoint to extricate themselves from that relationship. But dealing with the Lions, and a thing that I've pointed out already on these streams is the London Lions, despite the nature of that sale, I think now the British Basketball League has rebranded as the Super League. Hopefully Betfred or the Rugby League guys don't come after them for any sort of copyright infringement with that. But I think the London Lions, by virtue of what they managed to achieve in Europe, became quite a valuable brand, right? Now, do you think, Frank, have any bearing on why the Tessinet and Zalgiris and the connection there? First, tell us a bit about that connection, and do you think that figured into their interest, that impact that the Lions had in Europe, and therefore the subsequent allure, maybe, of them as a brand, as opposed to the 777 connection and all the messy stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't had the chance to speak to Tessinet or Zalgiris about this yet, so this is an assumption, but it can only have been adding to the appeal of London Lions. I mean, London Lions, what they've done domestically and in Europe, they've become the standard bearer really for British basketball, both in the men's and women's game. And I think, the fact that they've had some success in Europe probably made a few other people outside of the UK take notice. And for sure, if you're looking at potential acquisitions, who want to do some kind of multi-club model, which has been obviously done in football a lot, then the fact that they were up for grabs, basically, of course, any ambitious owner is going to have a look at that. But I don't think it's just about the fact that they've played well in Europe and the fact that they've done well domestically. I think London and the UK has a huge amount of potential as a basketball market. You just have to look at the popularity of the NBA games and also the US Olympic team when they came and played at the O2, just to see how much appetite there is for watching basketball in this country. So I think they're probably conscious of the fact that there's a lot of commercial potential in the London Lions beyond just what they can do on the court.
What kind of stuff do you mean?
Well, I mean, as a brand, London Lions have achieved a certain amount of recognition. If you have success, if you're playing in Europe, if you've got a large fan base that's very engaged, and obviously London is a huge market. They're the only team in London, right? It's a huge market. Then that's a sound footing for a business model. You look at like what other teams in professional sport do in terms of ticket prices, and I know that they're now saying they're going to take London Lions on the road a little bit around London, no doubt to bigger venues, which they perhaps think they can sell out. So in ticket sales, in sponsorship, and other commercial agreements, I mean, I just think it's a bit of a no-brainer, to be honest.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think there is something there that could be. I mean, it begs the question for me. In some ways, in fact, I actually think when you extrapolate from this properly, in terms of brand damage from the whole messy episode, I think the British basketball whole has come out more damaged than the London Lions have. And that the future for British basketball, where we're basically just like rolling it out again under a different guise, is... I mean, it's just basically sort of you're laying the groundwork for some of the same mistakes, maybe not the exact same nature of mistakes, but at least the same problems that are blighting the game, a lack of profitability and all of those different facets, which I don't want to get into the minutiae of in this particular podcast. But I think that British basketball has come out of this a lot more damaged, brand, reputationally and everything else, than the London Lions themselves have. Paul, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's debatable. But before we go on to that, let's just roll back to what you were saying there about the value in the Lions, because I slightly disagree in some ways. What was a buyer essentially buying, picking up the London Lions? It was buying brand recognition, the logo, and the debt. Essentially, that was it. Frank touched on it before. The thing that gives this franchise the value is the fact that it was invited to compete in this new British Basketball League, essentially. Without that, it's almost a worthless commodity because you're buying a basketball team with no league to play in. And this comes back to why it was sold to the group that it was sold to. It's been clear for months that the rival clubs in the BBL had wanted to extricate themselves from the 777 fiasco for some time. They were looking for a way out, couldn't find it, and decided the only way they could do it was that a new league would have to be formed without 777. Those same clubs all decided, with good reason, that having a flagship London franchise in that league would be very important to for both the competition and for its marketability. So they essentially always had a veto on who was going to buy this franchise, because those clubs which formed a new league had the power to say, yes, we will accept these owners into our competition, or we will not accept these owners into our competition. So it seemed very much to me as though the administrators were going through the process of ticking the box of selling the club to the right people, because there only ever was one bidder considered to be the right people, because there was only ever one bidder considered okay to join this new league, and that was the Zalgiris group. And anybody else was basically never going to be allowed to buy the Lions, and if they did, they were buying a worthless commodity because it was a club with no league. It would have been very interesting to see if a rival bidder had come in with a much higher bid that the administrators could not have ignored, and they accepted that bid, but that this bidder was not allowed to bring the Lions into the new Super League. What would have happened then? Because if you're buying a sporting franchise with nobody to play against, you're essentially buying nothing, right? You're just buying the debt. So I think that the whole process was a little odd, and the statements made by Zalgiris into why they're buying the Lions and what their future plans are for the Lions are also a little odd. They've said a lot of things which beg more questions than answers, really. They talked about the Lions generating revenue which would be shared with Zalgiris. They alluded to the Lions becoming a feeder team where young players would grow and develop in this market and then end up in the Zalgiris sphere instead. And the statements they made about the competitions the Lions would be playing in were also a little strange. I mean, obviously the Super League didn't exist by that point, I don't think, but they referred to a league that was already defunct and that the Lions would be playing in, or they weren't going to be playing in it because it didn't exist. And they referred to the fact that the Lions would be competing in Europe. And that again begs the question, do Zalgiris intend to fund a competitive squad which can qualify for a European competition through the Super League? Or do they feel there is another route into a European competition for the Lions? Are we going to see the kind of spending that 777 put into salary? I doubt it. We're yet to see, roster announcements or anything else. This is all quite sudden, I accept, and will take some time. But I think there are huge question marks over exactly what the business plan is here from Testament and Zalgiris, and that won't become clear for a few weeks yet.
I think those are all good points. There's so much I could push off to ask from that. I think the questions about British basketball and what the nature of what they're trying to do are very valid. But Frank, I would be really interested to note your views on that final bit there that Paul is asking, just in terms of what maybe the intention is going to be and what they have acquired and almost what is behind it. I think, sorry, and just another thing, Paul, I think it will be interesting to dive into in future podcasts, just maybe as one to park in the pocket, about the 777 connection that was there. And then now, obviously, there's one preferred bidder, as you say, come in. And there has to have been some link along the chain where they knew that they were going to have a team competing in the league this year, even though it arrived a bit later than everyone else and all of that sort of stuff. That had to be something that was figuring in there. So obviously, knowing all of the ins and outs of the business side, Frank, what's your knowledge of the stuff that Paul is touching on there, just about the nature of the intention that Zalgiris or Tessonite have on that? And then in terms of the acquisition of the asset, as it were, what are they actually getting there and what are they hoping to do with it?
Well, I mean, there's two very, very good and very big questions, and we kind of are waiting on some answers on both of those points, really, because to date, all we've got to go on is the statement that Zalgiris put out on their website on the 31st of July, which, as Paul rightly says, does raise a lot of questions about exactly what they envisage for the London Lions, whether it's as a feeder club to help develop young players, or whether it's as a kind of essentially another outpost of the Zalgiris network, but in a very lucrative market. They haven't answered those questions yet. Nobody from Zalgiris has put themselves forward to talk about this, and equally nobody from London Lions, since the deal has done so either. So there are a lot of big questions that remain about what the future of the club is going to be. I noticed when the Nines did put out their statement a few days after the deal was done. Finally acknowledged the fact that they'd been bought. They talked about, you know, how it was going to be a new regime focused on sustainability and things like that, which is obviously in stark contrast to what's come before. So clearly, the future of London Nines is going to be, you know, running a tighter ship with fewer costs, and it remains to be seen really what that looks like. But I totally agree with Paul that the whole process has raised a lot of questions that are yet to be answered.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think the interesting part for British basketball fans right now with regard to this is the part of the segment of this that relates to the rest of the ecosystem of the league and in general. Where does everyone else end up as a result of what has happened with the London Lions? And the deal itself, as you said, Paul, there was only really one sort of kind of denouement of this if it was going to happen in a quick time frame. Also, is it normal that when administrators are in a position like this, they go for the quickest viable option? I'm pretty sure that's right. As long as it's a relevant one, if there's a chance for a quick sale to one key party, that is normally the way these things work. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have legal responsibilities to do the best deal for the entity. It just seems to me that the only deal available to this entity was one which would include approval to play in the new league, and without that, you're not really buying anything of worth. So, you know, I would be interested to know if the founders of this new league had given any indication that any of the other bidders would have been allowed to bring a Lions franchise into their competition, or were the Zalgiris Tesseract bidders the only ones who would have been granted that position? It sounded very much to me like they were, and in that case, the administrators wouldn't really have had much choice but to accept that bid.
So who then controls that from a British basketball standpoint? Who are the determiners? Because everything's been so. Someone actually said to me in a conversation that it's almost been like dealing with a cartel in terms of the way that the information has been so closely held. And I think it was an analogy that wasn't actually too far in terms of the hyperbole of it, because the way that this has all been done has all been administrated in such a careful and step by step and just leaking things out kind of way. That's what's happened here. It's been very controlled. If you're then talking about the administrator side, what's happening there? Surely there's some conversations happening in the background that have been kept very, very under wraps. And is that ethically right, legally right? How does that work?
Well, I don't think there's any question of it being legally wrong or difficult, really. You can see it from the point of view of the club owners who are forming this new league. The point really is that we don't know a lot about who is really the driving force behind this new British league. There's some information available at Companies House into the entity itself, and there are people making public statements on its behalf. We didn't have much detail when it emerged on, you know, a board of directors or which of the former BBL club owners were driving that process the most. Educated guesses can be made. I should think.
Absolutely, they can.
There are clearly louder voices in BBL circles than others among the clubs, and always have been. There's no particular problem or issue with that. But obviously, the administration process has a different. The administrators have a different goal to the club setting up this league, and you know, I go back to the point that it seems to me that without having a league to play in, a bidder was buying a pretty worthless entity. So it would have come down to whoever is making those decisions for this new league. It would be lovely to know exactly what the hierarchy and the setup is there, and who has the final say on those kind of things. But we don't yet, because this has all been a bit of a rush. But clearly they had a role in deciding which party would buy the Lions.
Without a doubt. Frank, I'm going to throw back over to yourself now, because what I want to know is, where did this approach, the Tessonette, the Zalgiris thing, come from? Because it was kind of, and apologies if there's a wee bit of background noise there. What I'm interested in is, it felt like there was some information leaked on the Lithuanian side of that before it became public over here, and it almost the dissemination, the fluidity of how that was all managed seemed a bit untidy. Do you have any insight into why that might have been the case?
Yeah, I mean, I'll come back to that point in a second if I may. I just want to chime in on some of the stuff that you were talking to Paul about.
Absolutely.
Just because that is some of the stuff that I've been speaking to people about, and in terms of like the veto that the Super League basketball organisers seem to have had over the potential buys. I think that's all fair, to be honest. I mean, it was this kind of catch-22 situation of, right, the administrators are trying to sell a club, but the club only has value if it's in the league. So the administrators, were the best one in the world, were trying to tell would-be buyers that, we still think there's a way that you can be in the league if you buy the club, but obviously there's no guarantees. And the only party that kind of had been through the process that Super League basketball was running, what that looked like, I'm not entirely sure, but they were doing their own due diligence on potential buyers of the London Lions, and the only party they made very clear that had passed that test, as far as they were concerned, was Tessonette. I mean, I think they stopped short of saying, categorically there is no way that any other buyer would be allowed to take part in Super League basketball this season. But I mean, it was pretty much that. It was pretty much that.
Not to throw a grenade in there, but like, should we trust British basketball figureheads' due diligence on anyone after the 777 saga?
Well, time will tell, I suppose. But I mean, I think after the 777 saga, they've clearly recognised that there was a lot of things wrong about the way the league was being run, and I guess they'd have learned those lessons, and they're trying to implement them in terms of like how the new setup is being arranged, and on that, in terms of like who was actually running the show. I mean, Paul's bang on that we do need a lot more clarity on that, not just at league level, but also at under nines level. But on at league level, it's my understanding that it's been driven by Vaughan Millett of Sheffield Sharks, and that he's the one. If there is somebody who is making the decisions or is at the top of the chain, it's my understanding that it's him.
Interesting. What more can you tell us about him before you come on to your next point?
Not an awful lot, but just when I've spoken to people who are involved in or have been close to the setting up of Super League basketball, that's the name that I hear being referred to as the person that things go through. So I can't really say any more than that, but that's my understanding of it. To your question about where did the sort of Tessonette approach come from, did they have a heads up that the Lions were in trouble? Well, I don't know about that, but what we do know obviously is that talks between Tessonette and 777 were ongoing before the administration process. So I think it's reasonable to assume that 777, having acknowledged the fact that they needed to basically sell or at least get an investment into the club, we're probably shopping London Lions around and seeing who might be interested. So yeah, they probably did have access to information. Don't forget they made that loan to the club that was booked on, I think, the 15th of July to help cover short-term expenses and basically keep the club afloat for a few more weeks. They clearly knew that something was going on. Weeks before the administrator said London Lions at the same.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that, because there's a obviously 777 are the elephant in the room here still. 777's two remaining directors, Josh Wander and Adam Weiss, definitely were not shopping the Lions. They wanted to keep the franchise. They disagreed with the decision for the license to be pulled on the BBL. Why they took that position is a bit unclear, because the Lions are a relatively small investment here in the 777 portfolio. They don't generate a lot of revenue. There isn't a reason to defend that asset particularly strongly, but they certainly did, and both of them refused to resign as part of this process. They're both still listed as directors currently on Companies House, but I presume that will change at some point when the filings catch up. What is the case, though, is that clearly the Lions needed money. That's why they took the loan, as Frank says, from Tessanet. And the interesting thing is that from the investigations we've been doing at Josimar, we discovered very quickly that 777 were part of something slightly larger, and that their biggest financial backer, a New York owner of various insurance companies in the United States called ACAP, was essentially calling the shots on a lot of their business, including at times the Lions. As long ago as last summer, the 777 steering committee met, and 3 members of ACAP were present at that meeting, and the Lions were discussed in great detail. And towards the end of that meeting, one of the members of ACAP chimed in and basically said that the policy moving forward should be to look for a sale of the club. This was last summer. The idea being that they were going to try and buy the copper box, win the right to buy the copper box, which obviously didn't happen. That would drive value for the franchise, at which point they would be able to sell it, because the idea being, if you own the venue, your costs come down because you're not paying outside people all the time to do all the work on the court, etc., etc. And they thought that the Lions would then become a more sellable asset. Now, we don't know whether 777 ever really agreed to this strategy, but it was certainly something that ACAP was pushing for. And the point in time we reached when the administration process started, at that point in time, 777 had already basically collapsed. There's almost nothing left of the company now. ACAP has repatriated as much of the assets that it invested in with 777 as it can. You can look at all of the different areas around the world where this has happened. The Bonza airline collapsed in Australia, largely because ACAP decided it wasn't going to fund that operation anymore. And ACAP has never shown any interest really in running a basketball team in Britain, because presumably it's not a lucrative market. It's not going to bring them any value. They don't care. So from ACAP's point of view, the Lions had to be sold. And if it was going to be sold, it had to be sold to whoever was going to take it off their books to stop it hemorrhaging money, basically. And there wasn't really anything that Josh Wander or Adam Weiss or anybody else at 777 could do about it. To come back to the issue about joining the new league, though, obviously, if part of your reason for doing this is to wipe the slate clean and have a London franchise in your league with no links to 777, you have to make sure it goes to the right buyer. And I was told that one of the bidders in the process, it was determined, had quite close links to 777, as if they were trying to use the administration process to emerge as a new entity, but still in the 777 orbit. I've no idea.
That's very interesting.
No idea whether that is true or not, but there were certainly suspicions that one of the bidders was doing so basically on behalf of Josh Wander, as a way to keep him there at the Lions. And for all intents and purposes, he is still there because he refused to resign and he's still listed as a director. But obviously now that it's been sold, that's a situation that can't continue. And maybe Frank might have some insight into that and what happens next in terms of the ownership and who's Algiris a point there. But my final point is, if you're trying to wipe the slate clean of 777, remove all the reputational damage these guys did, and launch a new league with no whiff of controversy about it, why has Lens Ballon, a former 777 employee, been allowed to be the guy who is now running the Lions? It's quite incredible to me that this guy is the one they've chosen to do that, if the idea is that you're supposed to be wiping the slate clean. Now, we'd heard talk weeks and weeks ago that Lens and Josh had some kind of falling out. He then appears to have left his position at 777. His profile no longer appears on their websites. If you go to his LinkedIn, all mention of 777 as a past employer has been removed. He
airbrushed the past.
Yeah, and this is actually quite common. We've looked at a lot of the guys who used to work for this company and what they've done with their socials since, and many of them have tried to remove all trace of 777. So I think that gives you an idea of what may be coming down the line and how scared these guys are of any reputational blowback to them. But it still strikes me as an absolutely absurd and really quite strange decision to have Lens Ballon there as the man running the Lions in this new league. And look, to give the guy his credit and play devil's advocate and try to be fair to Lens, it may well be that Lens smelled a rat here some time ago, has decided he made a mistake getting into bed with these guys, really cares about the future of both British basketball and the Lions, and wants to be a part of turning that around and having a successful franchise in the league. But I still come back to my point that the clubs who were trying to get rid of 777 have now managed to do that, and yet the former 777 franchise is still being run by a former 777 employee, and still has two people essentially on the board.
Yep, it's a question that's been asked by John Zarafa, by Matt from BPD, by various people, and I was going to come round to it, but the conversation, in fact, actually, Paul, you brought it around yourself. Frank, do you have any idea why Lens Ballon still remains connected to all of this?
I don't, and I come back to the point I made earlier on, which is that we're still waiting for a lot of answers and actually any sort of detail whatsoever about what the London Lions are going to look like going forwards, and who's going to be running it, and what their goals are exactly. So yeah, I've seen this question raised a couple of times now. I have asked the question to people connected to the situation. I'm still waiting on a reply on that. So it's something that clearly does seem odd. It does raise a lot of questions about how much of a break from the old regime the new regime will be.
I think there's an interesting point there. Paul did say that as early as last summer there was the methodology some circles in the back of the cap there that line should go. I'm wondering if that early balance essentially has stock in that direction, or that may have curried favour as the denouement of this process has gone on. How's that as a hypothesis?
Well, I'm not sure, because you broke up quite a lot there during explaining that. But I think if what you're saying is that Lens may be being rewarded for guiding the Lions towards this outcome. I mean, who knows? It's a massive hypothetical, so wouldn't really want to speculate. But if he is being allowed to continue in post, then clearly they've spoken to him and liked something about the way he's run the club. But yeah, this is among the many things that we are still waiting for sort of satisfactory explanations about.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think a lot of people are worried about that. By the way, just as a point of reference, how bad is the breaking up on my microphone? Is it sporadic, or has it been throughout the podcast?
Just a couple of times. Just mainly that occasion. You sound fine now.
Right, that's fine. I mean, I don't sound fine, Frank. I sound as fine as I managed to sound with a West Coast of Scotland accent. wearing a hoodie. I think that it does seem like the name of the game here and the aim of everyone involved from every aspect of this, and the reason that this podcast exists and once more has numerous hundreds and concurrent listeners is because British basketball fans want answers. And every different entity involved with any of these things, whether it's on the London Lions side, whether it's on the league side, whether it's on any of that, perhaps with the exception of the British Basketball Federation, who have been, at least on the face of it, very forthcoming and at least leading the kind of, almost leading the information being bled out about the league very, very gradually. And I appreciate there's loads of moving parts. There's quite a lot to try and administrate and pull together in order to make a league happen. I can appreciate that. Obviously, there's loads of vested interest there. There's advertisers, the sponsors, and there's the clubs themselves, and all of these different stakeholders involved in the process. So it is quite important that that league does happen. But the level of obfuscation and hiding information and trying to just essentially, they're asking fans to buy shirts, to buy tickets, to buy this, to buy that, without any assurances that of what is to come, and almost to say blindly put your faith in us that something's going to be right after a cataclysmic disaster has struck the domestic game. And that is I've said it on the previous streams, and it will be when this is released as a podcast on the kind of mission statement pod, that the reason for this podcast is to have conversations that maybe try to shed a bit of light on that, whether that is in terms of revealing information or just maybe putting some ideas into the sphere regarding why things might have happened or how that might have been the case, and almost who the puppeteers behind the scenes in this whole process maybe are. Because, and by the way, if any one of those individuals wants to come on this podcast at any point, it is an open invite. If you are a high-level British basketball stakeholder or person that wants to actually come and cordially, not in some Jeremy Paxman fashion, answer some questions and give some clarity to the hundreds of people that tune into this stream concurrently, and hopefully hundreds of people that listen, or maybe thousands even, that listen to the podcast, that deserve answers, that want answers, whose money you're going to be relying on to run your businesses, then please do come on. But I'd be interested in your views, Paul, on the Lens Ballon thing as well. You raised the question as to why, like, basically saying it's not really great that someone from 777 is involved here. But I gave my potential hypothesis as to why he may still be involved. Do you have any kind of thoughts or at least colour on that?
Honestly, I don't have any more insight than I gave in my last answer, really. It could be one of a number of things. My real point is, presumably the new owners of the franchise decided they wanted Lens as continuity, to be the guy who drives it forward. My point is, I'm slightly surprised that the other clubs have agreed to let that happen, because it's been them driving this effort to try and clean the sport up and, you know, remove what they thought was something in danger of dragging it down and collapsing it. So I'm a little surprised that has happened. The drip feed of information I don't think has been deliberate. You described it as careful, I think, earlier on. I don't think it's been particularly careful at all. I think this smacks as being a bit of a rush effort to get a league up and running. Announcements were made, you know, before the league even had a logo, any branding, a website, any kind of communications team.
Just to qualify that, though, I mean, it was more coordinated. It's been careful in the sense of like they've given something to the fans, just like a kernel or a snippet, just to try and sort of pay even lip service to them. But I do agree with you. I think organisationally it's been a mess.
I don't think it's the most professional way to launch a new league if you're, dripping little kernels of what you think might be good news to your fan base, if you can't back that up by showing what it is. We have very little detail on formats, competitions, even who was going to be in it when the first announcements were made. And I understand how difficult that is for the people involved, because they're rushing to get this up and running. But this is the point I'm trying to make. It feels like they were so desperate to have a league starting in September that they had to rush a lot of these decisions, and they put out what they could put out when they could put it out. It's just not the most professional way to launch a new league, and maybe that's clearly it's not by design. It's an accident. They haven't had a whole lot of choice. But if you are, for instance, a London Lions fan, I'm not even sure you can, but why would you buy a season ticket for the London Lions today? You don't know where they're going to be playing. You don't know who they're going to be playing. You know the rough makeup of the competitions they're going to be in, but you don't know what you're buying. Are they even able to sell a season ticket right now? I'm not sure they are. I mean, some of the club websites have a disclaimer on saying that your ticket will be honoured regardless of which competitions the team is playing in. But it's a little bit messy, and I think that all needs clearing up. So one of the big questions I have about the new league is there a TV deal? I've heard nothing about a TV deal yet. Have they been rushing for a September start because they expect Sky to honour the contract they had with the BBL and to show games live? I don't know. It's one possibility. But clearly, if they hadn't been ready to start in September, then things knock on, and you'd be looking at could they have delayed a few months? Would a delay of a few months to get everything properly in line been really harmful to the clubs? Because obviously they are all in a difficult financial position as well. The way the BBL ended wasn't really great for anyone. It was it's admitted it was a loss-making entity. These clubs need to be up and running and selling tickets and merchandise for something, right? So there is a time pressure on them. But I think the people involved in this process would admit privately, if they don't publicly, that it's not been the best way to launch their new venture. And if they'd had a choice or a chance to do it over, they would have done it in a different way. And I think also the saga with the Lions and the administrators was also a big issue, because knowing you have a flagship London franchise in your league with good brand recognition, even if it's a gutted roster full of kids, is going to improve your product and make it a lot more interesting to TV people, sponsors, etc., fans buying tickets, than it would have done without it. So there would have been a reason to wait for that situation to play out.
I agree. And I think it's going to be interesting in the coming episodes of this podcast, which will all go, I mean, they're all going to go down different routes and concentrate on specific things, but there is going to be a similar thread here of just asking questions that are relevant to the bigger picture here. And for me, a key part of that bigger picture, Paul, is exactly what you hit on there, because I think you said it's like, would they privately reflect that it could have been done better? I think they would. I think part of it is circumstance. It's the nature of what they're extricating themselves from. But there's also, I'm aware that everyone around this metaphorical internet-made table is having conversations with people and finding stuff out, sometimes hearing things, some of it credible, some of it less credible, some of it quite staggering. But the key part for me is some of the most staggering things I've heard, with one particular exception that I obviously retracted, has proven to sometimes be true. And that is the thing. So when I think about the rolling out of this new league and everything happening and it being a bit of a mess, I think that I reflect back to how much do we trust the people that are doing this? Not necessarily from a moralistic standpoint or whatever, but just in terms of their capability even. And I think genuine questions can viably be raised about that, such as being the administration of this process. But that's more British basketball. I want to finish on some Lions specific stuff. So I'm going to ask a question to each of you, and I'd be interested to get your view. And feel free if you want to reflect, either of you, on the respective answers. But I'll go to yourself first, Frank. What happens next with the London Lions from a business standpoint? And then subsequent to that, how have you got any idea of how things might look in 3 months' time or a year's time?
It's a huge question. I mean, as I've said sort of throughout this podcast, that, you know, until somebody from the London Lions actually comes out, spells out exactly what their plans are for how the club looks this year, how the club looks in the future, what the relationship exactly is going to be with Zalgiris, and is actually prepared to take questions from not just from journalists but also from supporters, from other stakeholders in British basketball. Until that actually happens, then it's really difficult to say what London Lions are going to look like. And I guess, you know, to your point about the business side of things, I mean, clearly, if they're going to be a feeder team for Zalgiris, they're not going to be as attractive or as competitive, and therefore as attractive as a sponsorship proposition, or even to watch, or even in terms of selling tickets, as they would be if they were going to be a team that was going to be funded on an equal basis, allowed to, you know, punch its own weight and actually try to compete in Europe. Clearly, those are two very different scenarios. So until we actually get to see what they've got in mind for the London Lions, then, you know, we're guessing, basically. So yeah, we eagerly await the day when somebody from London Lions puts their head above the parapet and actually spells out what they're going to do.
And what do you think the timeline is on finding that out? Like, do you have an idea of when would be A, an acceptable time frame, or B, an expected one?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, clearly it's going to have to be before the season starts, because you can't go into a season without having laid out your blueprint for what the club's going to be. I mean, really, it should have happened already. But the fact that we're, you know, just a few weeks away from when the first fixtures are going to be, it's got to happen. It's got to be one of the priorities. You can only assume that with the delay in the completion of the takeover by Tessanet, they've been focusing on, you know, things that are more behind the scenes, putting, you know, the right people in place and making sure that everybody knows what their jobs are between now and the start of the season, that they haven't got around to actually effectively communicating to the outside world what it is they're trying to do. But that really ought to be one of their top priorities now, especially. I mean, as Paul's already said, you know, they're trying to sell tickets. What are they trying to sell tickets to? Nobody knows what they're supposed to be buying into here. So if they want to sell those tickets, they're able to get out in front of the cameras and start telling people what it is they're going to be buying.
You made a point just quickly there. I promise this is the last follow-up. The right people in place. Who are they? And what are they doing? What are they going to be doing? Do we know anything about that yet?
I just mean by that, I just mean making sure everybody knows what their jobs are between now and the start of the season. You know, a lot of the people that are doing it will be the, you know, same staff as before. So, you know, in terms of who's going to be running it.
So So basically, just making sure that there is a viable club there to run, because everything's been done in such a sort of rushed time frame that it seems like it's basically just making sure that there is a staff there and a basketball club can run, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just making sure that all the work that needs to get done between now and the start of the season gets done. All the logistical stuff, all the boring stuff, and they'll, you know, they'll be. The only one thing they hinted at, which is going on, is obviously trying to build out the roster. Well, we have to wait and see what that looks like. Clearly, there's work going on that front too.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be one that is of interest to fans. Right, last kind of broad one before we go to some fans' questions from me, Paul, unless you want to follow up on any of that.
No, well, I was just going to say, what Zalgiris is planning is going to be really interesting to see. According to ACAP, the Lions were running were paying out $3.8 million in player salaries last year. That went up from that point.
Staggering.
There's obviously no way on earth that the Tesseract Zalgiris partnership are going to be doing anything like that. It wouldn't make any sense for them. I doubt they would have that kind of funding anyway. So the roster is going to look very different. But if you read the statement, I go back to what they said in their statement. It was described as a cooperation between the Lions and Zalgiris that will be marked by the development of promising youngsters. These youngsters, it says, will be players who grow up in the club system, will help generate revenues that the Lions will share with Zalgiris. That doesn't sound like they will be investing a lot of money in top players around Europe to come and play for London. And I think that's what Zalgiris need to clear up, really. It sounds like, at face value, it almost sounds like they're going to try and run a youth team in the Super League, see how it gets on, and if they can sell any of those players or feed them into the Zalgiris club, they will do. And that I may be wrong on that, but their statement certainly suggests that's what might happen. So you're not going to see an all-conquering London Lions team in the league this season. Many people will welcome that, because the disparity between them and the rest of the league, because of the money they had to spend, was obviously too great and hurt the competition in many people's eyes. But whatever they do, we will be seeing a less competitive Lions team next season.
For the benefit of those on the audio podcast, Courtsider Hoops has responded with just to provide a bit of balance to those thoughts there, Paul, although I think they're very valid points. He says, I'd really love to see some younger talents from Zalgiris head to London to gain some experience, and it could maybe be a pathway for some younger British hoopers to head there maybe too. So I suppose that alongside the kind of that from a London line standpoint, the idea of being a feeder club is obviously not a good one. Then maybe holistically for the British game, could it be better? We wonder. But I do accept where you're coming from. My question to you is just asked, Frank, about from a business standpoint, what happens next? From a British basketball standpoint, what happens next in terms of the London Lions for you? That's to you, Paul.
It's difficult to know. I just think everything is going to depend on the success of this new league, what kind of products they can put on the floor, and that includes the other clubs, not just London, how ticket sales go, and whether they can find a way to market this league around the world. Will we see it on TV? Will there be a YouTube channel? Will sponsors be interested? The success or failure of this will be determined by those things. It won't be determined by London. London is going to be a little bit of a sideshow, I think, to begin with. And I get that fans of the previous Lions will just be incredibly thankful that they still have a team to watch. But I think that team's going to look very different this season, and what its ultimate aims and goals are not yet clear. Whether the people running this new league can make a success of it or not is up in the air. It's debatable. We won't be able to take a look at it and see whether it's viable really for weeks yet, I don't think. I think if you look at all of the ticket revenue that the franchises in the BBL brought in as a whole, it's not a huge amount of money, and a lot of the clubs were losing money last season already in the old model. So something has to change for this to be a success. And I get that there's a big group of basketball fans who just want to watch basketball in Britain, and that's great. But there has to be a path to sustainability for this to work. Otherwise, you're going to watch leagues continually collapse in 3 to 5 year cycles, essentially. So I think the proof is going to be what the new guys who've come into this league and are driving it can bring, what doors they can open, what products they can put out, and how many people ultimately show interest in it. And I think we are probably quite a few weeks away from learning the answer to those questions yet.
Yeah, just Stacey Wright makes a really good point. She says London Lions are currently selling men's league season tickets for upwards of £350. So give us 350 quid for, I don't know, it's like that episode of Family Guy where they're like, do you want the money or do you want to pick what's in the box? What's in the box? People don't really know what's in the box. And that's the key. You're asking people for £350, which is a lot of money right now. Like, would cost a living and everything else. And there's just absolutely no clarity to it. It's why we're doing this podcast, I'll say again, is to answer some of those questions.
In fairness, if I could just jump in there, though, as well, that they were essentially doing that last season. There were 2 or 3 points last season when the whole league could have collapsed halfway through. That there were points where the BBL board did not know whether it would be able to fund its competitions for the next week. That happened at least twice last season. And anyone who would have bought a season ticket this time last year could have been in a position where those games no longer existed by the end of the season. So, let's hope they do a better job this time.
Absolutely that. Go through some fan comments to finish up, gents. So John Zarafa says post-Brexit visa rules will hugely limit Lithuanians playing for the Lions, and the reverse is true. That's something that's maybe worth exploring in a future podcast. You also said, Paul, how the London Lions will just be happy that they have got a team to go and see. So that obviously lends itself to me mentioning at this point that we will be talking about Plymouth basketball very, very soon. So many questions emerging from that. One of the most engaged fan bases in the league. Paul James, is this the end for his contribution to British basketball? And the sheer fact that for Plymouth, it's the same thing all over again. It's happened, and I think that, again, using the kind of exoneration, that I'm still a fairly newcomer, only 2-3 years in the British basketball space. I look forward to speaking to some more of the people for whom Plymouth basketball has been something they've dedicated their life to, and just how they're feeling after the news that's obviously emerged that they won't be competing. But sticking with the Lions, we've had some nice questions in. Prophecy, who as one of the great contributors in the space, shout out there. A question: could we expect, with the extra interest surrounding the administration process, you were talking about that earlier, Frank, that there could be a second London team constructed and soon? And I would also like to add into that the women's team, so domestically dominant and European dominance and success. Is there a future for another London team potentially, and for the women's team? Do either of you guys have any thoughts on that?
I mean, is there potential? Yeah, there's definitely potential, because if there's interest in buying the London Lions, and there clearly was, then it may have made some people think about what they could do in that space. But I think, as we've established, it all needs to go through the league, and the league have made it very clear that they wanted to get the number of teams that they had nailed down in plenty of time before the start of the season. They weren't about to kind of entertain any other discussions that were going to delay that. So if that is something that people want to pursue, then it's obviously going to have to go through the league, and who knows how long that might take. It won't be anytime soon, I don't think.
Any thoughts on that, Paul, and on the women's team side?
Yeah, I think there clearly is a will for there to be more than one London franchise. It's interesting that they made that change. That means that another one could be launched. Personally, I find it slightly unbelievable that we could run 2 London basketball franchises purely based on the sight of so many empty seats at Copper Box when the Lions were the all-conquering team that they were. Are there enough fans out there to sustain 2 London franchises? Probably not. You'd have to do an incredible job of marketing more than one to make that viable. I think that the test will be for the Lions franchise, at least in the coming season, when they're not putting out a product that wins so many games, that is as fun to watch, that has as many stars on the roster, how many fans will pay to come and watch that every week? Will they lose fans because they're not getting what they saw last season? That's entirely possible. Will they be able to improve the fan base somehow? You know, there are plenty of things you can do. There are marketing drives. You can reach out into local communities. You can fill seats other ways. But I think it's challenging to run one franchise in London. How many really successful franchises in London have lasted for long in the basketball world over the years? Not many, really. So it's interesting, and I think the league would certainly welcome another London franchise if one was viable and could be sustained. But I think there are big questions about that. For the women, I think what happened to the Lions women's team was absolutely appalling for them to find out when they did that this was going to happen, and just shows the utter contempt really that the owners had for that.
For sure.
I was pretty sickened by the way that came out, really, and it kind of showed the true colours of the ownership to a lot of people, I think.
I also have to say, amazing credit to those women on the back of that to go on and actually win it, because that shows, I think, an incredible strength of character, as well as being an outstanding basketball team, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. In purely cold, hard business terms, for an investor in the Lions, running a women's team was questioned. ACAP questioned repeatedly why they were even bothering to run a women's team. They looked at the bottom line, and I've seen paperwork showing that the ticketing revenue for Lions women at one point was as low as £15,000. It was projected to grow massively to over £400,000. But if you're an investor with no real interest in the sport or the characters or the people involved in your team, then you're going to ask questions about what the point of investing my money in this is going to be, right? And ACAP were doing that as long ago as 12 months ago. So, you know, whoever runs a women's team, to be successful, as the Lions show, costs a lot of money, and ultimately you're running that side of the business at a loss, and most investors would not be willing to do that. So unless you can find a way to change that situation, it's going to be difficult, I think, to see the Lions running a women's team anywhere near as successful as the previous one was, and in part that's because, you know, the team itself did such an amazing job and were so brilliant on the court, and, you know, kudos to them. Lots of them have moved on to better places, and good luck to them. But it looks like the Lions will be trying to run a women's team. I think I've seen mention of that in some of the statements going forward, but we are not going to see a team anything like the one constructed last season, and it is frankly quite expensive to get close to that again. So I doubt we will in the short or even in the near term.
Has there been any indication, Frank, regarding that from the Lithuanian side, like in terms of their interest in doing so? And if they did choose to do so, hypothetically, is the Tessonnette sort of financial infrastructure that's there, and also the interest in the basketball project from a holistical perspective, enough that they would entertain the prospect of doing so, do you think?
I mean, we're still waiting to hear from Tessonnette on this, and this is one of the things that has been frustrating, is that Tessonnette and Zalgiris haven't really engaged with any attempts to get answers to these questions. The only thing we know about the future of London Lions women's team is that there is going to be one, and that was part of the announcement that was made when London Lions confirmed that the SAG had been done. They mentioned that the general manager had been promoted, and they spelled out who was going to be running that side of things. So clearly there is a future for the London Lions women's team, but what that looks like, we still don't know. And as Paul says, all the references that London Lions have made to running a more sustainable operation don't really suggest that they're going to be going to be having the sort of players that they've had in the past and able to achieve the kind of success that they've achieved in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think a lot of the points that we're making here go to the wider sort of existential question about British basketball and understanding the development curve from both a sporting growth perspective and also in terms of the development curve from the way that an equity investor is going to look at it, right? And I don't think that those two methodologies align at all, because if you're looking at the growth curve for this sport, it's a decade and more to get to the stage where it's essentially business viable to be run in any sort of manner that you would consider to be quote unquote elite. And I think that's the key thing here. I think and the sort of epicenter of the frustration and the aggravation that is building is due to the understanding that people who are passionately involved in the game, either at a sort of kind of ground grassroots level, or also people like myself who cover the game from a professional standpoint, not British basketball specifically, but basketball specifically, everyone understands that this is the untapped market. The NBA do, the EuroLeague do. Everyone knows that the UK is the next big market to tap into. Now, if British basketball and those in charge of it actually manage to get heads around the table, align things right, and understand the growth cycle, like what is a decent reflection and a decent understanding of what the actual growth cycle is before you look for massive return on investment, then I think that would serve the ends of the sport in this country a lot better than just trying to go down this route of rebooting the same thing, but with a lack of imagination, a definite lack of clarity, and a lack of cohesion, I would say, at times to the whole process. We're doing fan questions and just about to finish, so I'm going to throw in a kind of random one at the end for fun, because it's just a purely speculation one. But just at this point, I want to actually ask either of you, if you get anything you want to add, just as a kind of general comment about the Lions or about the situation, please feel free to chime in now.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the one thing I would say that I haven't said so far is, you know, we've kind of hammered the London Lions and to some extent the Super League Basketball Organisation for not coming out and spelling out what they're doing. I do think we have to understand that, you know, there's been a lot of change over the last few weeks. They've been really concerned with survival, in both cases, and I think you could understand if, setting up interviews or laying out grand mission statements hasn't been at the top of their to-do list ahead of, some more kind of prosaic but very necessary work. But I do think the time has come now for both of those groups to actually, speak to people and at least give a sense of what it is they're going to be trying to do.
Absolutely. I think the fans deserve that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's fair comment too. I think that the only thing I would add, and it's not really just Lions related, is on 777. We are not yet at the point where we can see exactly how much reputational damage will have been done to British basketball in this country, because that story has a long way to play out yet. There are various court cases. There is likely to be quite a lot of fallout from what ultimately happens with 777. We saw the first bankruptcy filing from any of their entities last week in America. It won't be the last. And I think what could be of concern to people in basketball in this country is 777 obviously tried to buy Everton at one point. That collapsed quite spectacularly too, but they did loan a significant amount of money into the club. Bear with me on this. One of the subsequent buyers who came in, the Friedkin Group, walked away from doing a deal to buy Everton, partly because they were worried about that money and where it came from. And Friedkin was asking Everton's owner for indemnity against prosecution under the Proceeds of Crime Act because of his concerns about where that money may have come from. Obviously, British Basketball accepted a lot of money from 777 as well. And it would be fair to assume that there may be similar concerns from their point of view too. And I think this saga is going to be played out in courtrooms in the United States for the rest of the year and possibly longer than that. And you haven't really seen this story conclude yet. So I think there is still a potential for a lot of damage to be done to the reputation of the people who got into bed with 777 in this country, in all the spheres that they did, because it's not just basketball. It's the people at Everton. There are people all around the world who did business with these guys who are going to end up regretting it.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair point. One of the things that I think needs to be answered massively by power brokers in British basketball is, and by power brokers, I mean people that are in charge of clubs, people that are on the board of the new league or whatever shape. I mean, stakeholders can come in all sort of shapes and sizes, but anyone who has a modicum of say over, and at the time of the 777 deal happening, anyone that has had a modicum of shares a modicum of the blame for that going through. Now, there are various people that you could potentially. So I think there's been a desire to kind of lay the blame at the door of one individual and almost kind of move on from that. But I think it's important to point out that there was a network of people. And in some of my previous reporting, I did actually highlight that there was a network of people, a small one, but people that are at the top level of British basketball in terms of their stakeholding, who were involved in the decision to go that way. And I think anyone who's kind of tapped into that particular aspect of the British basketball matrix will be well aware that that is the case. And even though there can be lessons learned from situations like this, and you can kind of point to those things, there does have to be accountability. And the accountability does have to be something that is done in a tangible way for me. I think fans deserve that accountability. And I think if there isn't, if there's almost a look to go, oh, well, it's fine, it's been and done, it's gone, then I think that would be to the detriment of trying to do the kind of Phoenix Rise from the Ashes act that is currently going on. Fun one to finish. Why have the London Lions deactivated their Twitter account? And I want a hypothesis from each of you. I'll go to you first, Frank.
Maybe 777 have got the password and then anyone's know how to get into it. I mean, joking aside, presumably it's a different set of people who are running the account as those who were running it before. That's all I've got.
That's fine. I mean, I think that's probably closer to the reality. But Paul, I'm licensed to be outlandish. Why has the Twitter account been deactivated?
Look, it really wouldn't surprise me if Josh Wanderer had logged in and decided that was it and you're all going home, basically. It does raise a slightly wider point that what exactly did he oppose and how far down the line did he go to try and oppose the sale of the club? There was a point in time when he was trying to get lawyers to block the removal of the license for the league because he regarded that as an outrage, basically, and was telling everyone in no uncertain terms. So I do wonder, does Josh Wander think he has any intellectual property there that is owned by 777 and not the Lions? Is there any way he could contest exactly what was sold? It's probably too late for that. Frank might know more about how that process actually plays out, but it's just odd that we haven't heard from him at all in this process, and that when it began and when the Lions were, going through the process of the winding up order and then a sale through administration, we never heard Wanda's position. And all I know is that various people have told me that he refused to resign, refused to sell the club, wanted to keep it going, and that he's dead against this whole thing. So where is he now? What is his opinion, and what can he do, if anything? Those are all questions I'd like to have answered.
I think that's interesting. I also think it's obviously from a league standpoint and from the try to get my language right. I don't know if legislative is the right terminology, but in terms of the documentation of the league side of things, obviously it's a whole new entity. Transferring one, as is the case with the London Lions Club, is an interesting one, because I think even if you look at simple situations like working in any sort of organization, if a staff member exits, the right or wrong staff member can decide to take umbrage with that and then try to, in some way, we've seen things on before where Twitter accounts have been hacked or whatever it might be, and resulting on from the question. We've seen those kind of things happen before, and you just wonder, in terms of that extrication process, just how neat can that be? Can that be done in a way where you absolutely manage to move everything on and move everything away from 777? Or is there a danger that they could throw a spanner in the works? That's just one to throw in at the end there to leave people with to think about. Thank you very much to both of you gents. Frank, firstly, just for full transparency, not someone I've known for a long time, but I really appreciate your time today, mate. Some absolutely fantastic insight, and would very much, if you're willing, like to have you back on the podcast again if and when there's something new to talk about. But thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, pleasure to talk about it, and good to see you again, Paul, as well.
Nice one. On that note, is there anything you want to flag just in terms of where people can find you or any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, if you want to catch up with some of the reporting I've done on the London Lions, it's all on cityam.com. I've obviously covered the club owns administration, the various bids that came in, the league's position on this, and I tried to wrap it all up and answer a few other questions in a big long read I put out on Friday that you can see on my Twitter feed as well, which is at Frank Dallarez.
Fantastic. 2 L's for anyone that's wondering about the spelling. Paul, as for yourself, I think we've done a few of these now in various places, but thank you very much once again, man. It's been good to speak to you, and fantastic insight as ever. Anything from your point of view that you would want to flag up or direct people to?
No, I think everything I've done you can read on Josimar, and you'll see it on my Twitter, which is at PB Sports Writer. But all I would say is to watch this space, really, because the 777 story is far from over, and I think there'll be some quite big revelations coming out down the line, and whether it's me or somebody else who reports on those, we will see. But that there is literally so much to this story that hasn't been published yet, and I think some people in certain industries will be quite shocked when it is. So it's not something that people should forget about at all. I don't think they'll be allowed to.
So I suppose the last one then, because you spoke about reputational damage earlier. If 10 is the maximum, where are we at now on that scale from a basketball standpoint?
It's hard to put a value on it like that. I think it depends on your point of view, really. If you're a Lions fan who've seen their team have all this success and give them all these great days out around Europe, you're probably going to be willing to accept a little bit of reputational damage because of what 777 were, and there will be people who may not believe yet how bad some of that was or might turn out to be. But there is the potential for this to blow up in quite a big way over the next few months, and I think we'll just have to wait until you see the outcome of some of these court cases and we see what happens to 777 as a company before we can judge how much reputational damage there might be for basketball in this country. But it doesn't look good to me.
Well, that's definitely quite jarring to hear at the end. Always good to end on a positive, isn't it? Excellent. Right. Thank you very much to both of you gents. Plug time for me with regards to everywhere you can find all of the stuff. So first thing I want to say is thank you very much to everyone who has watched and taken part and given questions in. I've been a bit more organised today. I've got Twitter up there. So if you've seen me, I'm not looking into the middle distance yonder. I'm looking up at the screen, because an important part of these streams is the live interactivity element, the element that you guys, the fans, this is for you. And I want you to be a part of it. And as long as people keep tuning in, we've gone to over 500 people. And very quickly, it was the numbers were in the hundreds within a minute or two. Really, really quick. That level of interest in the content is obviously really nice to see. And thank you very much to everyone who has set aside time on your Monday lunchtime for this. If you're just joining the stream now or just towards the end, then this will be a podcast. I have to send it down the podcast tubes, if that's a thing. I'm making it a thing. I have to send it down the podcast tubes in terms of just trying to use a program that allows me to put it on various different places that host podcasts, etc., etc. All very boring stuff and time consuming. And if you're interested in helping out, then I would be more than happy to have someone collaborate with me on that. But this will be a podcast, so you can get it on there. You can obviously watch these streams I did mention at the start on YouTube. So if you haven't subscribed to YouTube yet, then it would obviously be beneficial for me if you could potentially subscribe to the Hodgie the Hack YouTube channel, and you can hit the bell on there in case you use YouTube as well as Twitter, because the majority of the watchers are on Twitter. If you're on Twitter and you follow me, then make sure to follow Frank and follow Paul if you want to keep across all of the developments with the Lions and the league in general from two of the best reporters, if not the best reporters in the British basketball space. And then in terms of this podcast, we've got the @Bouncy podcast account. So I would be really grateful if you could follow that. And I did something that I said I would never do. I can say that it's for a project at work, and there is a desire for me to get the numbers up for that reason, but you would be doing me such a solid. And I promise there will be bits of basketball content on there, probably NBA, admittedly. But if you could follow Hodgie the Hack on TikTok, then that would be a great help to me. And I do realise that, yes, I have totally sold out by having a TikTok. I am definitely way too old to be having a TikTok account. But unfortunately, when you work in content, you've got to kind of do that. And that's about it in terms of plugs. That is also it for episode 1. Officially, we've had a couple of beta goes at it, and the mission statement one, which may well appear on wherever your preferred podcast player is as well. But this is episode 1 of the Bouncy Orange Ball podcast. We are here to ask the questions and have the conversations about the big picture about British basketball. The conversations that are not being had in a public forum, and definitely where fans can at least get some semblance of answers to the questions that remain obfuscated by the people in charge of the game, for whatever those reasons may be. But thank you. Thanks from and to Paul and Frank. And I don't really have a sign-off for this. Keep on hooping? No. Make sure and ask Bob some questions and stay safe. Thank you very much. Take care.